Let's go back to the year 1900, when the Wabash Railroad was a symbol of the boundless ambition of America's industrial age, a sprawling network that connected farms, factories, and families across the heart of the Midwest. This wasn't just a railway, it was a lifeline for emerging economies, a pioneer in the fight for workers' rights, and even an unlikely inspiration for one of the most iconic songs in American history. But this is no simple success story. What if I told you that behind the grandeur of Wabash was a tale of daring innovation, corporate greed, and devastating failure? That its rise to prominence was as dramatic as its slow but painful demise. From bold expansions and ruthless rivalries to a final chapter that changed the railroad industry forever, the Wabash Railroad left behind a legacy that's as captivating as it is cautionary. So, just why did one of America's most famous railroads fade into oblivion? Stay tuned to find out, as today we discover the rise and fall of the Wabash Railroad. I'm your host Ryan Sokash, and you're watching It's History. Before getting started today, I wanted to clarify a question you guys keep on asking me. Where do I find the inspiration for these episodes? Well, for years now, I've been doing research thanks to the help of documentaries on Magellan TV, a platform that was also generous enough to sponsor this video. That's how I came across Supersized Structures, a series that takes you behind the scenes of the world's most impressive megastructures. Each episode reveals the challenges, innovations, and ingenuity that makes these marvels possible, from towering skyscrapers to monumental bridges. Another documentary that captivated me was the history of the Iron Lady, the Eiffel Tower. This incredible story shows how the Eiffel Tower initially met with harsh criticism, only later came to be a symbol of innovation and cultural pride. Watching these documentaries reminds me how important it is to access quality content while researching for its history. And that's precisely what Magellan TV offers, a perfect platform to explore fascinating topics like this. In other words, part of my routine when creating content is diving deep into inspirational topics. With Magellan TV, I can enjoy documentaries without interruptions as they're completely ad-free. They also offer 4K at no extra cost, a rare feature these days. Plus, I can watch on any device, whether it's my TV, laptop, or even my phone. So, as the weather gets colder this holiday season, there's nothing better than curling up with an excellent documentary. If you love learning and exploring as much as I do, you must try Magellan TV. You want to know the best part? There's a special offer. You can start for 99 cents for the first month or get 50% off the annual plan. Click the link in the description to start your journey with Magellan TV. I'm sure you'll find something that captivates you as much as it did me. Thank you, Magellan TV, for these fascinating stories and the access that's never been easier. But now, back to the story of the Wabash Railroad. The story of the Wabash Railroad starts in a very humble sense. At least, humble in comparison to what it would become. First off, let's examine the state of Illinois. You see, thanks to its flat terrain and role in manufacturing and industrialization, this part of the Midwest would become an essential player for American railroads and the entire trade. The Illinois Internal Improvements Act of 1837 permitted officials to construct 1,300 miles of railroad track, marking the beginning of Illinois' long relationship with railroads, key of which for our story is the Northern Cross Railroad, which also emerged as a result of this bill. You see, in 1838, this railroad ran its first operation with a steam locomotive that carried a group of people from its starting point in Meredosia to its end 8 miles away in Chaplin, Illinois, and then back, of course. Meredosia was chosen as a starting point due to its proximity to the Illinois River, which also provided an outlet for river transportation. And although this was just one small trip, it was the beginning of something huge. Before any further expansion could happen, however, Illinois had a huge issue. The state's internal effort towards railroad construction would mainly become soured by the downward economic trend caused by the Panic of 1837, a crisis initiated by unstable banking policies and land investments. However, after recovering from the economic depression, railroad magnates extended the railway to run through Jacksonville and Springfield, the capital of my home state, Illinois. By 1842, the network stretched across the vast expanse of the Midwestern flatland, and the rail lines began taking hold of the area on which they were laid, becoming an integral part of American culture. The line was run until 1847, when Thomas Mather and Nicholas Ridgely won it in an auction for 2.5% of its original cost. By 1849, Mather and Ridgely revamped the railway, renaming the line the Sangamon and Morgan Railroad. Local benefits included farmers seeing corn prices increased, with the state's residents now enjoying trips to places like Decatur and the Indiana state border. Though perhaps none of them imagined a time when this local railway would become intertwined with the commerce of Pennsylvania, 3 far states away. For railroads to take the next step forward, maximizing profit and usability, they had to establish interstate rail lines. Hence, the Toledo and Illinois Railroad was first planned in April of 1853. It would run from Toledo, Ohio, to 75 miles west at the Ohio/Indiana border. In August of that same year, a charter was drawn to construct the Lake Erie, Wabash, and St. Louis Railroad, and it was this line that connected the Toledo and Illinois Railroad west through Wabash, Indiana, Illinois, and then finally St. Louis, Missouri, marking the first time the name Wabash was included in a rail title. And eventually, it would be this Indiana town that would be used as the namesake of the aforementioned architectural feat in Pittsburgh, the Wabash Terminal. The Toledo and Illinois Railroad and the Lake Erie, Wabash, and St. Louis eventually merged in August of 1856, creating the 243-mile-long Toledo, Wabash, and Western Railroad Company. Thus, a path was created from St. Louis to Lake Erie. Unfortunately, though the infrastructure was now in place, the merged company failed to meet its financial obligations and was sued in the Northern District of Ohio, as well as the District of Indiana. In 1858, both entities were split back into their original forms and sold in their respective states. From there, both roads were purchased and taken under the possession of New York Representative Azariah Bodie. As Bodie came under possession of these entities, the courts agreed on how they could be organized. The Toledo and Illinois Company would become the Toledo and Wabash Company, whereas the Lake Erie, Wabash, and St. Louis Railroad would become the Wabash and Western Railroad Company. Later, in the same year, in 1858, the merger between these two companies formed the Toledo and Wabash Railway Company. Though these changes could best be described as corporate chaos, behind the names and the towering companies were the many passengers who both worked and rode these lines. Some trips were more notable than others, such as when Abraham Lincoln left the station at Springfield, Illinois. Pictured here is a group of people honoring him after placing a stone upon the very spot where he once stood. The 1858 formed Toledo Wabash Railway Company merged once again with the Great Western Railroad of Illinois in 1865, consolidating into the Toledo, Wabash, and Western Railway. Notably, it was the primitive Great Western Railroad of Illinois that included that early Northern Cross Railroad, the first railroad in the state, and the earlier iteration of any Wabash line. At this point in the story, the railroad would eventually spread all the way to Pittsburgh and welcome a particularly beautiful piece of architecture that looked like this, known as the Wabash Terminal, a structure which symbolized the reality of the situation. You see, the second and enhanced version of the Toledo, Wabash, and Western Railway was very lucrative, and the company was forward-thinking, testing out steel tracks and other updated equipment. Further expansion in 1870 went as far as acquiring the Decatur and East St. Louis Railroad, though the Panic of 1873, caused by European stock market crashes, eventually hindered the Toledo, Wabash, and Western Railway companies as workers went on strike and earnings plummeted. Yes, that's right. Railways didn't exist in the vacuum of American economics, as they relied on international investments, such as from European-owned railroad bonds. In 1875, the Toledo, Wabash, and Western Railway Company and its 678 miles of track filed for bankruptcy and were sold the following June in 1876. Along the way, further consolidations occurred with the Quincy and Toledo Railway, the Warsaw and Peoria Railroad, and the Illinois and Southern Iowa Railroad, all of which came under the management of the Wabash Railway Company in 1877. This led to even further consolidation with the St. Louis, Kansas City, and Northern Railway, adding over 778 miles of road west of the Mississippi River. So the Wabash Railway Company and the St. Louis, Kansas City, and The Northern Railway turned into the Wabash, St. Louis, and Pacific Railway in 1879. The railway also played a role in the landmark Supreme Court case of 1886 called Wabash, St. Louis, and Pacific versus Illinois. The decision of the court ended up limiting states' rights to play a role in interstate commerce. You see, Illinois had been charged with giving unfair rates for goods being transported over to New York. The state had violated the Commerce Clause by putting strain on the interstate commerce, which the Constitution only allows Congress to regulate. Thus, the Interstate Commerce Commission was created as a direct result of this case. 3 years later, in 1889, the Wabash, St. Louis, and Pacific Railway had reorganized into the Wabash Railroad Company, holding about 3,518 miles of track. It should also be mentioned that John Whitfield Bunn was essential to the consolidation, a Midwestern American figure who was often involved with the industrial endeavors and finances, and apparently was a good friend of Abraham Lincoln. Anyhow, with so much track mileage now, the network was in need of new repair/back shops, and he delivered. The trains could now be repaired at Springfield, Illinois, in addition to many newly acquired shops for both freight and passenger cars. Later in 1902, the company's president, J. Ramsey Jr., confirmed that 78 acres of land in eastern Decatur had been purchased, also with the intended use of shops. As the number of repairs continued to increase, with the East Decatur shop being used all the way up until the point that steam service ended on the line. So finally, after almost 70 years of consecutive railroad expansion, consolidation, and alteration, in 1904, the Wabash Railroad Company expanded to form the Wabash-Pittsburgh Terminal Railway. It was through this addition that the Wabash-Pittsburgh Terminal was constructed, a symbol of increasing connectedness across America, as well as the local industrialization taking place in Pittsburgh itself. The magnificent 11-floor complex was planned by architect Theodore Carl Link and funded by financier George J. Gould. 11 floors may seem like a bit much for a railroad station on first thought, but floors 4 and above were offices for the Wabash Railroad, owned by the financier himself, which, with thousands of miles of track, might have actually been a modest space. The first through third floors offered waiting areas, retail, and ticket booths for passengers. Passengers which enjoyed waiting in a dignified, if not regal space. Although a beautiful sight that once defined the railway company, the building would end its tenure after a very brief 4 years in May of 1908. The Wabash Railway went bankrupt in 1908 as it overextended itself and used too much of its funds to shatter the Pennsylvania Railroad and the New York Central Railroad's near monopolies. Fortunately for onlookers, that did not mean the doomed terminal would disappear right away, as after the financial issues, the Wabash Terminal building was used in the Pittsburgh and West Virginia Railway all the way up until 1931, but at that point, even passenger service ended. Now, the terminal was not abandoned outright. You see, freight and office uses persisted until 2 fires occurred in March of 1946, destroying much of the freight warehouse that once welcomed trains. With this formerly beautiful building in near complete ruin now, it was perhaps through an architect's tears that the complete demolition was planned for October the 5th, 1953. These days, a building that I could best describe as a monstrosity in comparison to the beauty of the original terminal, now resides where the complex once stood. In the fall of 1960, the Pennsylvania Railroad leased the Wabash to Norfolk and Western Railway. In 1970, the Pennsylvania Company then split from Wabash for the last time by exchanging shares for the Norfolk and Western's common stock, which was divided due to the 1968 merger in Penn Central Transportation, though to a degree at least, the Wabash Railway still existed in name, because it was leased, not wholly merged. Its stock was traded on the New York Stock Exchange, that is, until November of 1991, when the Norfolk finally merged with the Wabash, ultimately rendering this once great rail line a subsidiary. A move that, in name, was the final nail in the coffin. As we close the chapter on the rise and fall of the Wabash Railway, it's impossible not to reflect on the powerful legacy it left behind. The Wabash wasn't just steel rails and locomotives. It was a story of human ambition, innovation, and resilience. It's a reminder of how progress, no matter how unstoppable it seems, can still be vulnerable to the tides of time, competition, and change. And yet, the Wabash lives on, not in the clattering of trains and tracks, but in the echoes of history and culture. One such echo is the Wabash Cannonball, a song speaking of a mythical train that captures the magic and romance of an era when railroads were the lifeline of the nation. We'll leave it there for today, but if you enjoyed this story, don't miss our playlist on America's Railroads by clicking right here. You can also support the channel by clicking subscribe or joining our new Patreon. Those buttons are here. Otherwise, until next time, I'm Ryan Sokesh, signing off.